She-Hulk. It's gotten a lot of hate over the last few months, but why is that? A friend of mine opined that even though the writing for the male-led MCU products in Phase 4 was just as bad, She-Hulk was getting unfairly maligned and sarcastically asked, boy, I wonder why. Well, my brain being what it is, that question kept nagging me. Why is She-Hulk getting so much hate? Is it incel review bombing, or is there something else going on? I decided to pit it against a male-led MCU trash pile, Thor Love and Thunder, which miraculously has nearly twice the audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. So, why is Thor rated fresh and She-Hulk treated like raw sewage on a dinner plate? After a lot of digging, I figured it came down to two main factors: the protagonist and the contentious relationship between the studio and the fan base.
Well, you're right.
Thor Love and Thunder is a piece of crap. There's no getting around that. But it got a lot more leeway than She-Hulk. Why is that? One reason is the protagonist. Thor has built up a lot of goodwill with fans over the last decade or so. He's a hero we know and love, someone we want to see succeed, and even though his films have been pretty hit or miss, he's usually presented with his core character traits intact. After his initial drumming down in his debut film, he became humbler, selfless, kind, and cared more about others than aggrandizing himself, though that ego of his did shine through at times. He cares about his family, his friends, and those he is sworn to protect. Even when he's not doing heroic saving the universe stuff, he still feels deeply for those around him and is willing to put others before himself when the chips are down. It may seem unfair to compare a character that we've gotten to know over multiple films to one we're just being presented with, but even by the end of his first movie, we saw the character grow and change significantly, and that core didn't vary a lot with any projects going forward. Goodwill with the audience was established, and we wanted to see more of him. He's a good guy. He's handsome, charming, and good-hearted. He cares about others and is willing to do good things, even if it costs him. This is his core, and what makes audiences warm to him, even if Love and Thunder tried to reduce him to a joke. We like him and we want him to succeed. Then we meet Jen Walters. Her first introduction to audiences in the show is her tearing down not one, but two of the most beloved Avengers, mocking Captain America for his assumed virginity like a middle schooler and treating Bruce Banner like an annoying peasant. Now, that wouldn't be so bad if handled right over the course of the series. After all, we've seen arrogant jerk males in the MCU turn into heroes before. But the difference is how the show handles Jen's attitude. The audience is basically told that if you're annoyed by her behavior and mistreatment of others, that you are the problem. She isn't pushed back on in any meaningful way. She isn't taken to task for her actions. When Thor arrogantly started a war and demanded his throne, his father rightfully told him off and put Thor through a trial that would teach him humility. When Tony Stark got out of line, his friends would call him on it, even if he didn't listen until he got a missile to the chest. Even Peter Parker got told time and again that in spite of his powers, he had a lot of growing to do. You see, the hero's journey is one of overcoming not only physical obstacles, but internal ones as well. But anytime someone questions or corrects Jen, the show treats that person as an insect to be squashed, a moron, an incel, or worse. And anyone who lauds her poor choices with praise is deemed a good guy. Thor in Love and Thunder, though presented as a doofus, loves and cares for those that challenge him. He gives others a chance to redeem themselves and stands by those he loves. And he stands by his ideals even when all is lost. All he wants is what's best for others, even if he has selfish moments that shine through at times. Jen, on the other hand, never does anything for anyone in the entire show that doesn't directly benefit her. She says all she wants to be is a lawyer, and then she either refuses to do her job or does it in such a way that would get her disbarred or fired numerous times, but she just keeps failing up. And that's even if we forget the most egregious moment in the entire series.
Controlling my anger. I do it all the time. When I'm catcalled in the street, when incompetent men explain my own area of expertise to me, I do it pretty much every day, because if I don't, I will get called emotional or difficult, or I might just literally get murdered. So I'm an expert at controlling my anger because I do it infinitely more than you.
This was the moment that broke most fans. On the surface, it may seem okay, until you think about who she's talking to. Any other male Avenger, and this might have been okay, but Bruce freaking Banner? And the worst part is that the show never addresses her hypocrisy. She rails against less qualified people telling her how to do her job. She's doing it. And then she claims that she is infinitely more qualified to control her emotions than someone who has lived with the knowledge that if he's startled by a bus or sneezes the wrong way, he could wipe out a small country. Those who had come to know and love the dual characters of Hulk and Bruce were understandably pissed off at this point. And if at some point later on the show had addressed this and shown Jen to be humbled by her experiences, like when she lost her ish 5 separate times during the show and either outright murdered or nearly murdered dozens of people and caused millions in property damage, maybe the folks that had doubted and hated on her would have had to have eat crow. But by the end of the show, Jen literally threatens and beats up people just trying to do their jobs, and then goes full-on Karen to force God to rework reality to suit her fancy. She hasn't learned or grown. She is a child playing pretend and making everyone else go along with it, no matter the cost. She ignores her own bad choices and surrounds herself with sycophants that praise her while decrying anyone who questions her as evil. These are not the traits of a sympathetic or likable person. These are the traits of a sociopathic villain. And given how the studio and the fans of the show treat any and all detractors, this seems less like calling out toxicity than a self-insert for people who are just as selfish and don't want to own up. And that brings us to part 2, fan baiting. Now, keep in mind, She-Hulk is a character fans loved from early on. In the 80s, She-Hulk was a bestseller. Those runs are considered one of the best representations of the character ever put to pen. Thousands of copies sold a week, mostly, and this is fair, to men. So why the hate for the show? You could put it down to toxic maledom, but given a few extra factors, including the number of women that dislike the show, I don't think that's the case. I think it comes down to how the studio, and by extension the fans, chose to react to the critics. From early on, it was obvious that Disney was engaging in what has now become known as fan baiting. They took a few toxic tweets and turned it into a marketing ploy. Sexist dude bros were being sexist dude bros. Yeah, it happens. Welcome to the internet. So Disney, the writers, the showrunners, and the actors on She-Hulk leaned into this minuscule hate wave and decided to base their entire show on it. In spite of everyone involved admitting they couldn't write law, didn't know comics, didn't know how to use CGI, and were flying blind on a show called She-Hulk Attorney at Law, instead of getting advice from someone with real-world experience, the showrunners decided they should lean into fan baiting. By the end of the show, the lead actress said this: "Reading the script, it was so true. There's so much resistance to a woman just existing in the space of superheroes." But looking at a quick Google of Rotten Tomatoes scores, you have to wonder what she's talking about. In a world where Black Widow has over 90% audience scores, and the only female superhero films that rank lower than She-Hulk are widely considered campy trash, you have to wonder if she's even seen a superhero movie or knows the names of the superwomen that came before her. And this is the biggest part of the problem. When Thor Love and Thunder first came out, there was some backlash that Natalie Portman looked about as ready to wield Mjolnir as a toddler, and Disney tried to make bank on the perceived sexism. But after the movie came out, and Taika Waititi obviously didn't give a crap about how the film was received, things died down. It probably didn't help that Thor was a box office bomb, not even making back its production and marketing costs. While Disney wanted to make it seem that sexism was the reason Thor failed, the publicly available numbers told a different story. So, the studio quietly allowed the movie to fade into obscurity while they promoted their next product. But She-Hulk was a different animal. There are no publicly available numbers for streaming shows unless the studio releases them. But that's a pipe dream as of yet, and She-Hulk Attorney at Law, in spite of the vast fan base, the popular comic book run, and the goodwill for the character built over decades, is still receiving a tsunami of online hatred. So why is that? Well, when a studio and a fan base is faced with a turkey, they have one of two options. Either admit they made a mistake, or go full MAGA Trump and declare victory, and anyone that says otherwise is an enemy of the state. Disney decided on the latter. The problem is there's only so long you can push people before they shove back, and rather than write a good show and defend it on its merits, the She-Hulk showrunners decided to antagonize, openly admitting that that was what they were doing. Where Taika Waititi took it on the chin, collected his check, and was willing to move on, the people running She-Hulk allowed the trolls of the internet to live in their heads rent-free. And it showed. and the toxic positivity of the studio flowed outward. Now it's nearly impossible to have a conversation with a She-Hulk show fan that doesn't end with one of two extremes. Either you're a fan, meaning you praise the show on every level, or you're a monster for daring to question the show's merits. And that's the big problem. I've admitted that Thor Love and Thunder was a garbage pile. It certainly doesn't deserve the positive audience rating it's getting, but the main character and the goodwill built up until now has given that movie some leeway in spite of the latest film's extreme flaws. Meanwhile, we're faced with a new protagonist who is selfish, mean-spirited, and dismissive. A person who shows no growth, and a creative team that is admissibly hateful to anyone who dares question them, and who encourages their fan base to treat any detractors as the next Hitler. You can only shove someone for so long before they shove back. Is it any wonder She-Hulk is getting review bombed while other female-led films are being praised? Going back to that quote from Maslany, there's so much resistance to a woman just existing in the space of superheroes? I guess she and the showrunners just forgot about all the relatively successful and well-received female-led superhero projects that came before, including the comic book her show is based on. It's almost as though, rather than create a genuinely good show, or at least be willing to take some criticism on the chin, they preemptively created a straw man narrative, made a show to fit that narrative, and then blamed everyone but themselves for the backlash they themselves seem to want to happen to justify it. All in the name of empowerment. Talk about toxic positivity. And the studio marketing trickled down into the larger fan base, until anyone who had a problem with the show was all but scourged in the town square, treated as monsters, and reviled until death threats became the norm. How is it that those that claim to be fighting toxicity have become the most toxic fans of all? Well, next time I'll address this issue by comparing She-Hulk to one of her female predecessors, and show why one series failed, and the other excelled. Comment below if you think you know which one. And until then, happy viewing.